Hi, my name is Park Linscomb, and I'm the preacher for the Rock Hill Church of Christ in Frisco, Texas. I'm glad you joined me for this short devotional idea, maybe to give you something to think about. You know, Jesus often received invitations to dinner. It was a social obligation to invite a traveling teacher of God's will to dine in your home, and many religious leaders of Jesus' time did that. One day, a Pharisee, and by the way, the Pharisees were a religious party of Jesus' day, a very conservative party. This Pharisee, by the name of Simon, invited him to come to his house to eat, and Jesus accepted the invitation. Of course, on the one hand, Jesus might have been expected to enjoy the hospitality of religiously minded people. It seems like they would be natural friends and allies. On the other hand, almost anyone who knows much about the life of Jesus knows how often he criticized the Pharisees, and how bitterly they criticized him for refusing to follow the traditions that they revered. So, when Jesus accepted the invitation of Simon the Pharisee to dine with him, it's a bit surprising. You just know that an aggressive religious discussion is about to break out. And who wants that? And sure enough, things start off kind of poorly. The ordinary niceties of hospitality, the common demonstrations of respect for a guest, are completely overlooked. Not only was there no one to wash Jesus' feet, there was not even a basin of water offered so that Jesus could wash his own. There was no kiss of greeting, that was their version of handshaking. There was no kiss of greeting that was offered. No oil for the head of the guest was provided. All indications seemed to be that Simon's invitation was little more than a perfunctory religious obligation of hospitality to a traveling rabbi. But then, a woman quietly came into Simon's house, having heard that Jesus was there. She was a sinner, probably a prostitute, and she'd heard that Jesus was dining in Simon's. She doesn't introduce herself to him. She just weeps on his feet behind him, enough that wiping the tears off his feet with her long hair seemed to be enough to wash them. She kisses his feet, and then, taking an alabaster vial of perfume, she anoints his feet. And here's where the aggressive religious discussion breaks out. Yes, see, Simon doesn't say a word, but he thinks to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who and what sort of person this woman is who's touching him, that she's a sinner. But thoughts are as open to Jesus as speaking them out loud. So Jesus responds with a simple parable about appreciation. In Luke chapter 7, verses 41 and 42, he says this: A moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50 denarii. Denarii was roughly what a person would be paid for a day's work. So one is owed about 500 days' work and the other owes about 50 days' work. When they were unable to repay, he graciously forgave them both. So, which of them, Jesus says, will love the creditor who forgave all their debt more? Now, this was a simple question, and Simon easily answered it, to his own detriment, by the way. Of course, he says the one who is forgiven the most would love the most. Oops. Simon just exposed his own lack of love and appreciation. There's something for us here to chew on, too. The parable and his question were prompted by the drastic contrast of Simon's lack of ordinary respect due a common human guest, and the lavish and moving demonstrations of love and respect given by the sinful woman. Jesus' point was that Simon clearly appreciated him little, while the woman clearly loved and appreciated him much. Love and appreciation, as we all know, are always demonstrated by respect and acts of love. Simon, in his self-righteousness, didn't realize how sinful and how much he was in need of forgiveness. The woman, on the other hand, knew all too well how desperately she needed forgiveness, and it showed. Let me ask you to consider a few questions in view of this story about Jesus and Simon the Pharisee. Are you nearer to being like the woman in the story, or like Simon? Is your worship, is your Christianity kind of a minimal, perfunctory offer of service, or is it a loving, passionate, respect-filled, eagerly obedient outgrowth of appreciation? Does your casualness, your lack of attentiveness, a minimalist offer of service and worship and discipleship? Does it betray something that we'd really like to deny? Perhaps we sometimes forget how much we have to be forgiven of, and how much we still depend upon His daily grace. Have there been too many ho-hums and too few tears? Have there been too little broken-heartedness and too much, I've got it covered? Has there been too little wiping of Jesus' feet with our hair and too much wiping our consciences with excuses? Have you offered the Lord too many table scraps and not enough vials of perfume? You see, while we thought we were following Jesus into Simon's house, we were actually following Him to a place of self-evaluation. Surprise. Give thought to some of these things. My name is Park Linscomb. I preach for the Rock Hill Church of Christ in Frisco, Texas, and I hope that you'll come and join us in worship and in Bible study. We'd love to have you ask questions. Hope to see you soon.